Under the eerie glow of a crescent moon, deep in the heart of the Andes, shadowy figures moved in silence. Their chants echoed through the stone ruins as they performed rituals so secret, so forbidden, that speaking of them was punishable by death. These were not just ceremonies, they were acts of power, whispered only in the darkest corners of history. Today, we uncover what was meant to stay hidden. 25 ancient Andean rituals so dangerous, so mysterious, that they were erased from time. From blood pacts with the gods to spells that could bend reality itself, these practices were guarded fiercely until now. What secrets did the ancients bury? And why were they so desperate to keep them from the world? Strap in, because the truth is stranger and far darker than you've ever imagined. High in the icy peaks of the Andes, where the air grows thin and the silence is absolute, the ancient Inca performed one of the most haunting rituals in human history, the Capacocha. It wasn't just any sacrifice. These were children chosen for their purity, taken on a sacred journey to the mountaintops, and offered to the gods in a ceremony both terrifying and reverent. But what made these sacrifices so important, and why were children the chosen vessels for divine communication? The selection process was meticulous. Inca priests sought unblemished children, free of any physical imperfections, believing their innocence made them the perfect intermediaries between the earthly and the divine. Some were taken from noble families, others from distant villages, all destined for a fate both honored and heartbreaking. Once chosen, they were paraded through villages in lavish processions, treated like royalty before their final ascent. But the journey to the mountaintop was no simple trek. These children, some as young as 6 or 7, were fed ceremonial meals, given chicha, a sacred corn beer, and even coca leaves to ease their suffering as they climbed into the freezing altitudes. Archaeologists have found their remains perfectly preserved in the ice, their bodies wrapped in fine textiles, surrounded by gold and silver figurines, offerings meant to accompany them into the afterlife. The most chilling discovery: many of these children didn't die from exposure or starvation. Forensic evidence suggests some were given a sedative, then struck on the head, a swift ceremonial end. To the Inca, this wasn't murder. It was the ultimate act of devotion, a bond between humanity and the gods sealed in ice and blood. And high in those frozen tombs, the echoes of their sacrifice still whisper across the centuries. Some of the most startling revelations about the Capacocha ritual didn't come from ancient texts or oral traditions. They emerged from the ice itself. Modern forensic science has peeled back layers of mystery surrounding these child sacrifices, revealing details so precise they rewrite what we thought we knew about Inca beliefs. CT scans and chemical analysis show traces of coca leaves and alcohol in the children's systems, substances that likely dulled their senses before the final act. But the most haunting discovery: some victims had their lungs inflated, evidence they were alive when buried. This revelation sparked fierce debate. Was this a swift, painless transition into the afterlife, or something more unsettling? Scholars remain divided. Some argue the children were revered, even willing participants, raised from birth knowing their fate as divine messengers. Others point to the psychological impossibility of true consent at such a young age. The truth may lie somewhere in between, a blend of cultural conditioning and solemn duty, where sacrifice wasn't seen as tragic but transcendent. What's undeniable is how these findings reshape our view of Inca spirituality. These weren't acts of cruelty, but profound transactions with the gods, offerings meant to ensure fertile crops, military victories, and cosmic balance. The care taken with the body's elaborate textiles, precious grave goods, speaks to deep reverence, not callousness. Yet for modern observers, the moral chasm between then and now remains impossible to ignore. Perhaps the greatest lesson lies in perspective. To dismiss these rituals as barbaric misses their sacred logic, one where death wasn't an end but a sacred bridge. The children weren't lost, they were exalted, their voices frozen in time, still echoing from the peaks where heaven and earth once met. As the moon's shadow crept across the sun, plunging the Andes into an eerie twilight, the Inca priests sprang into action. To them, a solar eclipse wasn't just a celestial spectacle, it was a crisis. The sun god Inti, their divine protector, was under attack, and so began one of the most dramatic rituals of the ancient Andes, the blood-stained Sun Ceremony, a desperate act to restore balance to the cosmos. Eyewitness accounts from Spanish chroniclers paint a vivid picture. Priests clad in gold-adorned robes would gather in sacred plazas, their voices rising in frantic chants as the world darkened around them. Then came the bloodletting, not random violence, but a precise ceremonial act. Using sharp obsidian blades or golden tumi knives, they would pierce their own ears, tongues, or even limbs, letting crimson droplets fall onto sacred altars or into ceremonial cups. Some accounts suggest animal sacrifices, llamas, their throats slit, their hearts offered still beating. To amplify the plea, the tools themselves held deep significance. Obsidian, volcanic glass sharper than steel, was believed to carry the energy of the Earth's fiery core. Golden tumi knives, often engraved with Inti's face, were more than instruments, they were divine extensions of the sun god's power. Every cut, every drop of blood was a direct conduit to the heavens. But why blood to the Inca? It was the ultimate currency of life force. Just as water nourished crops, blood nourished the gods. A weakened sun demanded immediate payment, a transfusion of human vitality to stave off cosmic collapse. Spanish observers, horrified, recorded priests collapsing from blood loss, only to be revived and pushed to continue, proof of their unshakable devotion. Modern scholars see layers of meaning here. Beyond mere superstition, the ritual reveals a profound understanding of humanity's place in the universe. The Inca didn't just watch the sky, they participated in its cycles, binding their fate to the gods through visceral, tangible acts. To dismiss it as primitive misses the point. This was a civilization so attuned to the cosmos, they believed their blood could literally hold the sun in place. And perhaps in a way it worked. Every recorded eclipse passed, the sun always returned. To the Inca, that wasn't coincidence, it was faith rewarded. Beneath the towering stone walls of ancient Andean temples, another ritual unfolded, one that blurred the lines between this world and the next. Known as the Chicha-hallucination rites, this ceremony wasn't about solemn sacrifices or blood offerings. Instead, it relied on something far more intoxicating: sacred maize beer spiked with powerful psychoactive plants, unlocking doorways to the spirit realm. The process began with chicha, a fermented drink made from chewed and spit corn. Yes, you heard that right. Priests and chosen women would masticate maize, allowing enzymes in their saliva to break down the starches into fermentable sugars. This method, though unusual to modern sensibilities, was essential for creating the drink's signature potency. But this wasn't your typical brew. Colonial records describe shamans adding potent hallucinogens, perhaps vilca seeds or the San Pedro cactus, transforming the beverage into a vessel for divine madness. Drinking this enhanced chicha wasn't a casual affair. Participants would ingest it in carefully measured doses, often within sacred chambers adorned with woven tapestries depicting ancestral spirits. As the toxins took hold, the room itself seemed to pulse, walls breathing, shadows twisting into faces of long-dead elders. Spanish chroniclers, horrified yet fascinated, wrote of priests speaking in tongues, their bodies convulsing as they relayed messages from the beyond. Some reportedly collapsed, their souls traveling to distant celestial planes before returning with prophecies. The visions weren't random, they followed a cultural script, a shared hallucinatory language passed down through generations. Participants frequently described encountering the same deities: Viracocha, the creator god emerging from mist; Pachamama, her earth body unfurling like roots. These weren't mere hallucinations, they were structured, sacred dialogues with the unseen. modern chemists analyzing residue in ancient vessels have detected traces of tropane alkaloids compounds known to induce delirium and out-of-body experiences. This confirms what the Spanish dismissed as pagan frenzy was in fact a meticulously engineered spiritual technology. The Inca didn't just drink to get drunk, they drank to dissolve the barrier between living and dead, if only for a night. And in those fleeting hours of chemically induced ecstasy, they believed they could touch the face of the divine. Among the gleaming treasures of Andean temples, one object held a sacred yet terrifying purpose: the golden tumi knife. With its crescent-shaped blade and intricate carvings, this wasn't just a tool for ceremony. It was an instrument of radical healing, wielded by priests who believed pain could purify the soul. The most startling evidence: hundreds of unearthed skulls bearing precise surgical holes, proof that the Inca didn't just worship the gods, they operated in their name. Archaeologists examining these skulls made a chilling discovery. Many showed signs of healing, meaning patients survived the brutal procedure known as trepanation. Imagine the scene: a priest, steady-handed, using the tumi's razor edge to scrape away bone while the patient, likely drugged with coca or chicha, endured the agony. But why? The Inca saw illness as spiritual imbalance, a corruption that could be carved out. Headaches, seizures, even madness were thought to stem from demonic forces trapped inside the skull. Drilling a hole, they believed, released the evil like steam from a pot. Yet the tumi's use didn't stop there. Some remains reveal amputations, clean cuts through bone, suggesting ceremonial removal of limbs afflicted by disease or deformity. Far from random mutilation, these acts followed strict ritual logic. A shattered leg, for instance, might be seen as a curse poisoning the body's harmony. Removing it wasn't cruelty, it was a mercy, severing the corrupted to save the whole. What stuns modern researchers isn't just the boldness of these surgeries, but their success. Skeletal evidence shows many recipients lived years after their ordeals, their wounds carefully healed. Some skulls even display multiple trepanations, proof that trust in this brutal healing ran deep. The tumi, then, was more than a blade. It was a bridge between suffering and salvation, wielded by hands that believed steel could cut deeper than flesh into the very fabric of fate. To dismiss these practices as primitive misses their sophistication. These were calculated interventions grounded in a worldview where body and spirit were entwined. Every slice of the tumi was a plea, a bargain struck in blood, earthly pain for divine grace. And in the quiet of those ancient operating chambers, the line between butchery and benevolence blurred beyond recognition. Deep in the heart of Cusco, beneath the watchful gaze of golden idols, a solemn procession unfolded, one that would mark the chosen women, the acllas, for a destiny beyond ordinary life. Known as Qhapaq Hucha, these ritual parades were far more than ceremonial pageantry. They were the first steps in a sacred journey that would bind these women eternally to the divine. Selected as children for their beauty and purity, the acllas were taken from their homes and raised in secluded acllas, houses of the chosen women. Here they were taught to weave sacred textiles, brew ceremonial chicha, and perform rites reserved only for those deemed worthy of serving the gods. When the time came, they were paraded through the empire in vibrant processions, their garments woven with threads of gold, their faces illuminated by the reverence of onlookers. The climax of their journey, a symbolic marriage to a deity, often Inti, the sun god, or Pachamama, the earth mother. Spanish chroniclers documented these unions with fascination and horror, describing ceremonies where priests draped the acllas in sacred cloth, anointed them with llama blood, and pronounced them divine brides. But what happened next remains one of Andean history's most heated debates. Some scholars argue these women lived out their days as high priestesses, weaving offerings and conducting rituals in remote temples. Others point to grimmer evidence: burial sites containing young women, buried with lavish grave goods, their bones showing no signs of long-term labor. Could these be the acllas sacrificed after their celestial marriages? The truth may lie somewhere in between. Like so much in Inca spirituality, the fate of the acllas wasn't uniform. Some may have served as living conduits to the gods, while others, perhaps those wed to wrathful deities, met a darker end. What's certain is that their lives were never their own. Chosen, exalted, perhaps even feared, they stood at the intersection of humanity and divinity, their voices forever lost to the whispers of time, yet their legacy lingers. In Quechua communities today, echoes of these rituals survive, woven into festivals, whispered in prayers. The acllas may be gone, but the memory of their sacred duty still haunts the stones of the Andes, a reminder of a world where mortals could wed the infinite. Among the scorching dunes of the Atacama and the arid plains of Nazca, the ancients performed rituals that pushed the limits of human endurance, not through bloodshed, but through the slow, deliberate unraveling of the body itself. These weren't acts of cruelty, but sacred trials designed to transcend the physical and touch the divine. In Nazca, future priests underwent the starvation trials, a grueling initiation where candidates fasted for days, sometimes weeks, until their bodies hovered on the brink of collapse. Deprived of food, their minds teetered between delirium and revelation. Spanish chronicles describe these aspirants collapsing in sun-baked courtyards, their lips cracked, their visions filled with swirling desert mirages that they believed were gods whispering secrets. But this wasn't mere suffering for its own sake. The Nazca saw starvation as a sacred furnace, burning away earthly impurities to reveal a clearer connection to the spirit world. Those who endured emerged gaunt but exalted, their hollowed cheeks worn like badges of honor. Meanwhile, in the Atacama, the driest desert on earth, another ritual unfolded, one even more unsettling. Here, the Chinchorro people practiced desert burials, but not in the way you might expect. Their mummies weren't laid to rest peacefully. Forensic evidence reveals some were propped upright, their skeletons arranged as if walking, with small pouches of hallucinogenic seeds clutched in their hands. These weren't mere corpses, they were the walking dead, sent into the afterlife armed with chemical keys to unlock the spirit realm. The contrast between these rituals is striking. In Nazca, starvation was a path to enlightenment, a stripping away of the flesh to reach higher understanding. In the Atacama, death wasn't an end but a journey, one fueled by plants that blurred the lines between worlds. Yet both shared a common thread, the belief that the body was just a vessel and true power lay in what lay beyond. Modern researchers examining these mummies found traces of Andean seeds, a potent hallucinogen still clinging to the burial pouches. It suggests a chilling possibility that these individuals may have ingested the toxins before death, embarking on their final voyage while still breathing. Were they volunteers guided by faith, or were they chosen, sent unwillingly into the unknown? The desert keeps its secrets, but the bones tell fragments of the story of a people so unafraid of death, they walked into it with eyes wide open. What's left now are echoes, the skeletal remains of starved priests, the mummified travelers frozen mid-stride. Together, they paint a portrait of a world where suffering and transcendence were two sides of the same blade, sharp, inevitable, and revered. And in the silence of those endless sands, you can almost hear the whispers of those who believed hunger and death weren't endings but doorways. The air in the sacred valley grew thick with anticipation as the drums began their steady, pounding rhythm. Young boys, barely teenagers, stood in a solemn line, their faces painted with ochre, their bodies trembling not from fear but from the weight of what came next. This was Huarachikai, the brutal yet revered coming-of-age rite that transformed boys into warriors, their passage into manhood sealed not with words but with blood. At dawn, the rituals began. Each boy was led before the gathered village, where a shaman pressed an obsidian blade to their bare arms or legs. The cuts weren't deep enough to kill, but they were deliberate, a test of endurance, a visible sign of sacrifice. Spanish chroniclers wrote of adolescents standing stone-faced as their blood dripped onto ceremonial stones, their refusal to flinch a badge of honor. But this wasn't just about pain tolerance, it was a covenant. The blood was collected in shallow bowls, offered to the earth as proof of their commitment to defend their people. Petroglyphs hidden in remote Andean caves tell the rest of the story. Etched into rock faces are scenes of these rites, figures with outstretched arms, lines of droplets symbolizing blood, and warriors emerging triumphant. Some carvings even show boys clutching spears afterward, their new status as protectors carved as permanently into stone as the scars on their skin. These weren't mere drawings, they were records of a sacred contract between generations. What's often overlooked is the psychological dimension. Anthropologists note that Qhapaq Hucha wasn't just physical trial, it was a communal reckoning. The entire village witnessed the act, their collective gaze binding the boys to their future roles. To cry out or falter meant shame, not just for the individual but for their family. Yet those who succeeded, they earned more than a title. They became living symbols of resilience, their scars worn as proof that they could bleed for something greater than themselves. Modern eyes might see this as cruelty, but the Inca saw it as necessity. In a world where survival hinged on strength and unity, Qhapaq Hucha forged more than warriors, it forged a shared identity. The blood dried, the wounds healed, but the lesson lingered. To be a man was to endure, not for pride, but for the people beside you. And in those silent moments after the cutting, as the chants rose and the drums faded, each boy stepped forward, no longer a child, but a thread woven into the fabric of his culture's survival. In the flickering torchlight of an Andean village, a strange feast was about to begin, but the guests of honor had been dead for centuries. These were the malquis, the mummified ancestors of the Inca, carefully preserved in woven baskets or seated in niches as if still alive. Far from macabre relics, they were active participants in daily life, consulted for wisdom, honored with offerings, and yes, even fed during elaborate ceremonies that blurred the line between the living and the departed. The process was as precise as it was surreal. Using hollow reeds or golden tubes, priests would pour chicha, the sacred corn beer, into the mouths of the mummified dead, letting the liquid trickle down their desiccated throats. Some mummies, bundled in layers of fine textiles, even had small openings in their wrappings where offerings of mashed potatoes or quinoa could be placed. To the Inca, this wasn't just symbolic, it was a sacred duty. By nourishing their ancestors, they believed they ensured fertile fields, healthy herds, and harmony between worlds. Spanish priests, horrified by these practices, launched a relentless campaign to destroy what they called devil idols. Conquistadors wrote of burning entire storehouses of mummies, smashing gold feeding tubes, and forbidding families from keeping their ancestors' remains. But the Inca resisted in secret. Archaeologists have since discovered hidden caves in remote valleys where mummies were smuggled, some still wearing their ceremonial finery, their feeding tubes carefully tucked beside them like buried treasure. Perhaps most astonishing are the modern discoveries like the mummy dubbed Juanita, found frozen on Mount Ampoto. Her stomach contents revealed traces of a final meal, likely consumed just before her sacrifice. Was she fed in death as she had been in life? The evidence suggests a chilling continuity. Even in their darkest hour, the Inca refused to let their ancestors go hungry. This ritual wasn't mere superstition. It was a profound declaration that death couldn't sever bonds of kinship. The malquis weren't relics, they were elders still seated at the family table, just in a form most cultures would find unthinkable. And in those quiet moments when chicha dripped onto centuries-old lips, the divide between past and present dissolved entirely. The dead ate, the living listened. And the cycle of life, unbroken, carried on. High on the jagged peaks of the Andes, where storm clouds coiled like serpents, priests climbed precarious stone platforms, not to take shelter from the tempest but to invite its fury. This was the Cataquil lightning invocation, a ritual so audacious it sought to harness the chaos of the storm god himself. Armed with bronze knives etched with zigzag patterns mimicking lightning, they stood exposed, chanting into the gale as the air crackled with static. Their goal, to channel the raw power of thunder into human affairs. The ceremony hinged on one brutal act, the decapitation of a jet-black llama. Its blood spilled the moment lightning split the sky. Archaeologists have uncovered these sacrificial knives, some still bearing traces of charred tissue, suggesting the animals weren't just slain but struck mid-ritual, their deaths timed to the storm's crescendo. Spanish chroniclers describe the aftermath in hushed tones, priests clutching the still-twitching carcasses, their hands burned from contact with the electrified blades, convinced the god's essence now pulsed through the offering. But while llamas, to the Inca, they were more than livestock. Their wool carried static in the dry mountain air, making them literal conduits for lightning. Black llamas, rare and sacred, were believed to draw Cataquil's gaze like living lightning rods. Their severed heads, often placed on spikes facing the tempest, served as both tribute and warning, a reminder that even the gods demanded payment for their favor. Modern meteorologists note something eerie. These platforms were often built near high-conductivity quartz deposits, naturally attracting strikes. Coincidence? Unlikely. The Inca may not have understood electricity, but their observation was razor-sharp. They knew where and when the god would strike, and they met him there, knives raised, voices lost in the thunder. What chills the bones isn't just the ritual's violence, but its precision. This wasn't blind desperation, it was a calculated gamble with divine forces. And when the storm passed, leaving scorched stones and the metallic tang of ozone, the message was clear. Some pacts with the gods aren't sealed with whispers, but with a scream swallowed by the wind. Beneath the otherworldly blue waters of Lake Titicaca, the ancient Andeans performed rituals that defied greed itself, rituals where unimaginable wealth was given freely to the depths. This wasn't carelessness, it was sacred surrender. The gold-drowning offerings were acts of devotion so absolute, they still baffle modern treasure hunters. Priests would carve miniature figurines, llamas, deities, even tiny farmers from solid gold, each no larger than a thumb. These weren't just trinkets. They were ilapa, vessels of intention. A gold farmer buried in the lake's silt might plead for abundant crops. A miniature llama could ensure healthy herds. Then, in hushed ceremonies, the treasures were cast into the water, vanishing beneath the waves as the crowd watched in reverent silence. But here's the twist, these rituals weren't just ancient. They continued in secret long after the Spanish arrived. When conquistadors began pillaging temples, Andean priests smuggled sacred gold to the lakeshore under cover of darkness, offering it to the water rather than letting it fall into foreign hands. For centuries, this hidden defiance went unnoticed until modern divers, armed with sonar, discovered something astonishing. In 2016, archaeologists probing Lake Titicaca's depths unearthed a sacrificial bundle wrapped in centuries-old fabric. Inside, a spondylus shell, a sacred symbol of water deities, nestled beside a gold foil llama so thin it fluttered in the current. Nearby, they found Spanish-era nails and horse bones, proof these rituals adapted rather than died. The lake had become a time capsule, safeguarding treasures not from the gods, but from men who couldn't fathom their worth. What lingers isn't just the mystery of what still lies buried. Over 2,000 ritual objects have been catalogued so far, but the quiet audacity of the act. In drowning gold, the Andeans transformed greed into grace. Every sunken figurine was a refusal, a whisper across time. Some treasures are too sacred to be held. They belong to the water, to the gods, to the unseen, and perhaps that's why these discoveries feel so haunting. The lake didn't just preserve gold, it preserved a philosophy. While empires rose and fell above the surface below, the offerings remained untouched, patient, waiting for a world ready to understand their true value. The air in the underground chambers hung thick with the bitter scent of crushed leaves and damp earth. Here, in the flickering glow of resin torches, Andean shamans brewed something far more potent than mere medicine, a psychedelic bridge between worlds. Ayahuasca, the vine of souls, wasn't just a hallucinogen. It was a sacred passport to the afterlife, wielded to orchestrate the most daring spiritual negotiation ever attempted: face-to-face meetings with the gods of the underworld. Archaeologists examining mummies from elite burial sites made a startling discovery: strands of hair laced with harmine and DMT, the key compounds in ayahuasca. But this wasn't recreational use. Toxicity levels suggest some individuals ingested doses so extreme they teetered on the edge of death. The ritual had a name: Chicha-fueled, learning by dying. Shamans would guide nobles through carefully calibrated near-death experiences, their souls temporarily untethered to bargain with deities like Supe, lord of the underworld. The ceremony followed a brutal precision. After days of fasting, participants drank the murky brew from golden cups shaped like jaguar skulls, animals believed to escort souls between realms. As the toxins took hold, shamans chanted over convulsing bodies, using bone flutes to steer the visions. Spanish chronicles describe nobles returning gasping, their pupils blown wide, babbling of caverns filled with obsidian mirrors and faceless judges weighing their deeds. Forensic analysis reveals the physical toll. Some mummies show brain lesions consistent with oxygen deprivation, suggesting shamans may have used strangulation cords to amplify the effects, briefly stopping the heart to deepen the journey. Yet what's truly chilling are the accounts of survivors. Several reportedly returned with uncanny knowledge, details of distant events or deceased relatives they couldn't have known. Modern researchers theorize the brews' neurochemical storm might have unlocked hyperassociative states, where memories and myths bled together into visions mistaken for divine revelation. This wasn't mere tripping, it was a high-stakes quest for hidden wisdom wrapped in physiological peril. To drink the vine was to flirt with oblivion, trusting the shaman's chant to reel you back from the abyss. And in those liminal moments between breath and silence, the Inca believed, truth waited not in the light but in the embrace of the dark. Deep in the Andean night, when the moon darkened as if swallowed by some unseen beast, masked figures emerged draped in glistening jaguar pelts, their human outlines blurred beneath the fur of the jungle's most feared predator. This was no mere costume. The feline skin transformations were acts of sacred metamorphosis, where warriors and priests didn't just wear jaguar hides. They channeled the animal's spirit, becoming something neither fully human nor beast during those eerie hours of celestial shadow. Spanish chroniclers wrote of stumbling upon these rituals by accident, their accounts tinged with horrified fascination. They described men moving with uncanny feline grace, their faces obscured behind gold masks shaped like jaguar snouts, their hands tipped with obsidian claws. Some reports even claimed these were jaguars could see in total darkness, their growls echoing through temple corridors as they hunted ceremonial prey, sometimes prisoners, sometimes volunteers, in mock stalkings meant to test their newfound predatory instincts. But the pelts themselves reveal even darker secrets. Recent forensic analysis of surviving artifacts shows something startling. Many hides still bear traces of a hallucinogenic paste made from the yopo plant, rubbed into the fur where it would absorb through the wearer's skin. This wasn't just theater, it was biochemical augmentation, a way to chemically blur the line between man and beast. The effect wearers didn't just mimic jaguars, they believed themselves transformed, their minds flooded with visions of running on 4 legs, tasting blood, feeling moonlight on spotted fur. The timing was no accident either. These rituals coincided precisely with lunar eclipses, moments when the Inca believed the barrier between worlds grew thin. Just as the moon was consumed, so too did the participants consume the jaguar's essence. Archaeologists have found buried caches of these pelts arranged in crouching poses, as if the skins themselves were waiting to spring back to life. What chills the bones isn't the savagery, but the sophistication. These weren't barbaric pantomimes, they were meticulously staged encounters with the wild self, a temporary surrender to instinct civilization usually suppressed. And when dawn broke, the pelts were removed, but some part of that primal force lingered. As one Spanish priest grudgingly admitted, they walked back into the light as men, but their eyes still shone like cats. Perhaps that's the true power of these rituals. They forced a question modern minds still wrestle with: how thin is the veil between human and animal? And how much of our civilized selves is just a pelt we can shed when the moon goes dark? Beneath the crimson-stained plazas of the ancient Wari Empire, a ritual unfolded so visceral, it blurred the line between victory and sacrament. This was no ordinary dance. Warriors clad in grisly trophies, necklaces of teeth, belts strung with finger bones, even severed hands dangling from their girdles, moved in hypnotic patterns, their bodies transformed into living altars of conquest. Recent forensic breakthroughs have peeled back layers of mystery surrounding these dismemberment dances, revealing a practice far more calculated than mere barbarism. Examinations of excavated Wari skulls tell a chilling tale. Many bear precise cut marks around the jawline and vertebrae, evidence of skilled removal, not battlefield chaos. But the most startling detail: teeth marks. Not the ragged gnawing of animals, but human incisors, intentionally grooving the bone in ritualistic patterns. Anthropologists suggest these were chewing ceremonies, where warriors symbolically consumed fragments of their foe's power. Imagine the scene: victors gnawing on curated bone fragments mid-dance, their movements both celebration and alchemy, transforming enemy remains into conduits of strength. Yet this wasn't senseless mutilation. The Wari saw the body as a map of sacred energy. Specific parts housed specific powers. A warrior wearing an opponent's jawbone might absorb their speech in council. A clavicle could steal their resilience. Spanish accounts, though biased, note that captives were sometimes dismembered while still alive, their limbs removed in ceremonial sequence to release energy gradually. Modern CT scans corroborate this. Some trophy heads show healed fractures, proving victims survived initial wounds before becoming ritual objects. What unsettles modern observers isn't just the violence, but its intimacy. These weren't anonymous trophies. Forensic reconstructions reveal many severed heads were carefully preserved with resin, their faces painted with ochre as if still living. Some even had artificial eyes, shell or stone inserts, forcing the deceased to witness their own incorporation into Wari power structures. The dances themselves followed strict choreography. Petroglyphs depict warriors circling counterclockwise, mimicking vultures descending on carrion, a sacred bird believed to ferry souls skyward. By mirroring scavengers, they enacted a brutal ecology: death nourishing life, enemies recycled into protectors. Perhaps what lingers longest is the dissonance. The Wari built terraced farms, engineered irrigation, wove textiles of breathtaking complexity, yet in their plazas they danced adorned with the dead. This ritual wasn't savagery, it was cosmology in motion, a belief that the boundary between self and other was permeable, and that true power required not just defeating enemies but assimilating them. And in the silent laboratories where these bones now rest, the grooves of ancient teeth still whisper a question: when we vanquish our foes, what part of them do we carry forward? The Wari had their answer etched in bone, danced in blood. The wind whispered through the sacred coca gardens of the Andes, where leaves weren't just harvested, they were listened to. Here, priests practiced one of the most intimate rituals of divination, the coca divination choose, a ceremony where the future wasn't read in stars or bones, but in the subtle stains of spit. The process was deceptively simple. A priest would take a handful of coca leaves grown in special enclosures where no harsh word was ever spoken, and fold them into his cheek with a pinch of lipta, a sacred alkaline paste. As the leaves softened, he'd murmur prayers to the earth, then press his tongue to the wad, shaping it carefully before spitting the mass onto a flat stone. The patterns left behind, veins, bubbles, streaks, were a code only the trained could decipher. A cluster of bubbles near the top might warn of drought. A jagged streak could signal coming conflict. But this was no random guessing game. The coca itself was believed to be alive, a plant with its own voice. Chroniclers wrote of priests kneeling for hours in the gardens, whispering to the shrubs as one might coax a shy child to speak. The most revered coca bushes, those that answered most clearly, were wrapped in golden threads, their leaves reserved for the emperor's own divinations. Modern anthropologists have uncovered something fascinating. The alkaloids in coca act as mild stimulants, sharpening focus and heightening sensory perception. Combined with the meditative repetition of chewing, priests likely entered a semi-trance, their subconscious minds interpreting stains with uncanny accuracy. Even today, Quechua elders in remote villages practice quieter versions of these rituals, chewing coca before planting crops or embarking on journeys, treating each leaf as a tiny oracle. What's striking isn't just the ritual's longevity, but its intimacy. Unlike grand sacrifices or bloody offerings, this was divination stripped bare. Just a man, a plant, and the quiet certainty that the earth, if asked respectfully, would whisper back. And in those sacred gardens where the coca rustled in the mountain breeze, the boundary between prayer and prediction dissolved into something far more profound: conversation. Under the ink-black skies of the Andes, when the moon vanished completely and the world seemed to hold its breath, the Inca priests led their most ominous offering to the altar, a jet-black llama, its coat so dark it appeared to swallow the torchlight. This was no ordinary sacrifice. The Black Llama midnight rites were ceremonies of profound cosmic bargaining, where the rarest of animals became bridges to the void itself. Recent genetic studies of ancient llama remains reveal something astonishing. These black-coated creatures weren't random anomalies. Soil samples from ceremonial sites contained traces of selective breeding, suggesting whole herds were cultivated over generations to produce the perfect sacrificial specimen. To the Inca, the color black wasn't just absence, it was potency. Like the dark space between stars, these llamas symbolized the fertile unknown, the realm where God spun fate into being. The rituals unfolded with eerie precision. On the night of the new moon, priests clad in onyx-colored robes would lead the animal to a sunken plaza, its hooves painted with ground obsidian to mirror the starless sky. Spanish chroniclers, witnessing these ceremonies in secret, wrote of the llama's eerie calm as if it understood its role. A single obsidian blade would slice its throat, the blood collected in a black stone basin to be splashed across sacred stones. But the sacrifice didn't end there. Forensic analysis shows the bones were often burned to ash, then mixed with volcanic sand and scattered into high-altitude lakes, a final surrender to the void. Why such extremes? The answer lies in Inca cosmology. Without the moon's light, they believed the universe momentarily reset, its energies raw and unshaped. A black llama's life, offered in that liminal hour, was thought to feed the formless darkness, ensuring the moon's return and the world's continued balance. Modern astronomers note a chilling detail. These rituals peaked during solar cycles linked to frequent eclipses. Proof the Inca tracked celestial patterns far beyond mere superstition. Yet the most haunting legacy isn't in texts or bones, but in living tradition. Quechua herders today still regard black llamas as sacred, refusing to sell them at market. Some whisper that on moonless nights their ancestors' voices rustle through the animal's ink-dark fleece, a reminder that some pacts between earth and sky never truly end. As twilight deepened over the Andean highlands, priests gathered in torchlit chambers, their hands cradling objects that gleamed like captured moonlight, polished pyrite mirrors, their surfaces unnervingly perfect. These weren't vanity tools, they were portals. The mirror portal rituals operated on a spine-chilling premise. that highly reflective surfaces could become doorways for spirits if handled with exacting precision. Spanish chroniclers described shamans spending nights staring into these mirrors, their faces eerily still as they murmured incantations. But the true purpose only became clear when archaeologists uncovered burial sites where mirrors were placed precisely over the mouths of the dead, a silent invitation for their souls to speak. Modern experiments reveal why pyrite's high sulfur content creates subtle electrostatic charges, especially when rubbed with cloth. To someone in a trance state, the resulting flickers could easily appear as spectral movement. Yet the mirrors were only half the story. Nearby, graves bore a far grimmer defense, rings of obsidian shards, their edges still lethally sharp after centuries. These soul traps weren't just barriers, they were spiritual landmines. Inca beliefs held that shattered obsidian, forged in volcanic fury, could sever malignant spirits mid-flight. Forensic archaeologists made a macabre discovery. Some shards bore traces of blood, suggesting living attendants nicked their fingers to activate the blades with human vitality. What's striking is the duality of these rituals, one inviting communion, the other enforcing separation. Mirrors called to benevolent ancestors with their shimmering allure, while obsidian's jagged teeth warned darker entities away. Together, they formed a sacred security system, balancing openness and protection in a world where the veil between living and dead was terrifyingly thin. Recent spectrographic analysis adds a haunting layer. Some mirrors retain residues of hallucinogenic oils, likely smeared on their surfaces to warp reflections into visions. Meanwhile, obsidian from specific volcanoes was deliberately chosen, its geochemical signature believed to resonate with particular deities. Every element, from the stone's origin to the angle of each shard, was calibrated with chilling intent. These practices reveal a worldview where the spiritual wasn't abstract but tactile. Souls could be beckoned or bisected, and the tools to do so lay literally at their fingertips. And in the quiet of those burial chambers where mirrors caught torchlight and obsidian drank shadows, the living negotiated with the unseen on terms as precise as they were profound. In the mist-shrouded villages of the Qhapaq people, a remote Andean community claiming direct descent from Inca priests, whispers persist of a ritual so extreme. It echoes the infamous heart sacrifices of the Aztecs. Elders speak cautiously of Qhapaq, the flowering of the chest, a ceremony where hearts were allegedly removed not to appease gods but to harvest tumi, the purest life essence. Yet, unlike the well-documented Aztec practices, these rites leave no clear trail in the archaeological record. So where does legend end and history begin? Colonial records offer conflicting accounts. Spanish friars wrote of stumbling upon highland ceremonies where prisoners' chests were split with ceremonial tumi knives, their still beating hearts offered to Apu mountain spirits. But crucially, these reports surface centuries after the fall of the Inca Empire, often from second-hand sources with clear agendas to vilify indigenous practices. Modern archaeologists have yet to find mass grave sites or ceremonial tools matching these grisly descriptions in Qhapaq territories, a stark contrast to the thousands of sacrificial remains uncovered in Mexico. The Qhapaq themselves add layers of nuance. In interviews with anthropologists, some elders describe symbolic heart removals using cactus spines to draw ritual blood while leaving the organ intact, a practice far closer to spiritual theater than literal sacrifice. Others insist their ancestors only performed full heart extraction during existential crises, like volcanic eruptions or pandemics, believing a single purified heart could rebalance the cosmos. Recent advances in forensic archaeology might hold clues. A 2019 study of atypical mummified remains near Cusco revealed one skeleton with its rib cage splayed open, not by trauma, but with precise cuts suggesting post-mortem ritual intervention. Could this be evidence of a rare, elite version of the rite? the debate rages on, with skeptics noting the bones showed no signs of the defensive wounds typical of violent sacrifice. What emerges is a mosaic of possibilities. Whether metaphorical or literal, the enduring power of these stories speaks volumes. For the Qhapaq, the heart wasn't just an organ. It was a crystalline vessel of willpower worthy of the most sacred trade, a single life willingly given to sustain many. And in the quiet of those mountain shrines where the past bleeds into the present, the line between myth and memory remains deliberately blurred. Deep in the wind-scoured highlands of the Andes, where stone burial towers called cholpas pierce the sky like skeletal fingers, an unsettling ritual unfolded whenever famine or disaster struck. Villagers would climb into these ancient tombs, gently lift the bundled remains of their ancestors and carry them into the sunlight, not to bury them anew but to consult them. This was the Cholpa bone reanimation, a sacred dialogue between the living and the long dead, where silence wasn't an option when survival hung in the balance. Archaeologists exploring these towers have found mummies in positions that defy conventional burial practices, some seated upright as if in council, others with limbs deliberately repositioned to mimic gestures. One particularly chilling discovery in the Lake Titicaca region revealed a mummy with its jaw pried open, a small gold disc placed on its tongue. Local Aymara elders later explained this was the Inca, a speaking charm meant to give the ancestor's voice physical form so it could advise the living. The process followed strict ritual logic. After carefully unwrapping the ancestor's bundle, priests would anoint the bones with llama fat and chicha beer, substances believed to temporarily restore sensation to desiccated flesh. Spanish chroniclers documented these ceremonies with uneasy fascination, describing how villagers would pose questions aloud, then listen for answers in the creak of bones or the direction of wind through the cholpa doorways. Some accounts even claim certain mummies exposed to cyclical freezing and thawing would audibly shift position overnight, interpreted as supernatural responses. Modern forensic studies reveal a pragmatic layer beneath the mysticism. Many rearranged mummies show where patterns indicating they were handled repeatedly over centuries, their bones polished smooth by generations of anxious hands. Soil samples from cholpa floors contain traces of hallucinogenic plants, suggesting living participants might have entered altered states to hear their ancestors more clearly. What resonates today isn't just the ritual's strangeness, but its profound intimacy. Unlike passive ancestor worship, this was an active partnership, a belief that not even death could sever communal bonds when crisis loomed. The dead weren't relics, they were elders with skin like parchment and wisdom etched into their very bones. And in those desperate moments when the earth turned barren or illness spread, the living climbed the cholpas not out of fear, but faith certain that those who came before would never let them face the storm alone. Beneath the torchlight of a sealed Andean temple, a priest steadied his hands as he pressed a golden needle against his own lower lip. This wasn't just body modification, it was an invitation. The Huaca possession ceremonies turned human flesh into a conduit for the divine, where self-inflicted wounds became doorways for spirits to cross over. And what the Spanish later described as demonic fits were, in truth, meticulously orchestrated acts of sacred surrender. Archaeologists have uncovered chilling proof of these rituals' gold and bone lip adornments still embedded in skeletons, their placement too precise to be accidental. These weren't mere piercings, they were anchors. Chroniclers wrote of priests inserting tapered spikes through their lips during ceremonies. Each twist of the metal meant to tether a Huaca, a spirit tied to natural landmarks like mountains or springs, to their body. The more severe the mutilation, the stronger the bond. Spanish accounts, though steeped in prejudice, capture scenes of chilling transformation. Friars described participants seizing violently, their eyes rolling back as voices not their own rasped from bleeding mouth. One Jesuit even sketched a priest mid-possession, his lip adornment stretched by an invisible force, tendons standing taut like bowstrings. Modern neurologists suggest these states might have been induced by a combination of blood loss, hypoxia from restricted breathing, and hallucinogenic ointments applied to fresh wounds, a biochemical perfect storm to breach ordinary consciousness. But the most revealing artifacts are the spatulas found in ritual bundles, flattened tools of gold or obsidian, their edges stained with ancient saliva and plant residues. These weren't for adornment, they were levers. By pressing the spatula against the pierced lip during trance, priests could physically manipulate the spirit's voice, shaping garbled sounds into prophecy. Forensic linguists studying colonial transcripts note haunting consistencies in these utterances, phrases in lost dialects, accurate predictions of droughts or landslides suggesting some messages defied easy dismissal as mere theatrics. What unsettles isn't just the pain but the precision. This wasn't blind frenzy, it was a calibrated exchange. Every drop of blood, every distorted syllable was part of a contract, temporary agony for transcendent knowledge. And in those smoke-filled chambers where golden spikes glinted in trembling lips, the boundary between agony and ecstasy dissolved into something far more profound, a whisper from the stones themselves. At the summer solstice, when sunlight struck the carved stone channels of the ancient Qhapaq temple just right, priests would gather with bowls of freshly drawn llama blood, not to spill it but to paint with it. These were the rainbow serpent blood drawings, a ritual where liquid life became living art, and the very air seemed to shimmer with possibility. The ceremony hinged on precise celestial timing. As the sun reached its zenith, priests would dip their fingers into the blood and trace sinuous, zigzagging patterns across specific granite slabs, patterns that, when hit by sunlight through the temple's angled windows, appeared to writhe like a great serpent emerging from the stone. Spanish chroniclers, peering through half-shutters in secret, described the effect as both beautiful and unnerving, the blood drying in jagged lines that caught the light as if scales were materializing from thin air. Modern archaeoastronomers have unlocked the science behind the spectacle. The Qhapaq's architecture was engineered to amplify light refraction at solstice angles, its trapezoidal windows acting like prisms to split sunlight into spectral bands across the blood-painted stones. But for the Inca, this wasn't optics, it was magic. The rainbow serpent known as Amaru was a shape-shifting bridge between earth and sky, and its summoning required more than pigment. The blood's iron content, reacting with sunlight, created fleeting iridescent hues, convincing witnesses they'd glimpsed the serpent's true colors. Recent discoveries add a visceral layer. Excavations near Cusco uncovered stone slabs still bearing molecular traces of hemoglobin and fatty acids, proof the blood wasn't merely smeared, but applied in deliberate, calculated strokes. Some slabs even show wear patterns from repeated scrubbing and repainting, suggesting these weren't one-time events but a cyclical dialogue with the divine. What lingers isn't just the ingenuity but the intimacy of the act. Unlike distant sacrifices, this ritual transformed priests into artists, their hands becoming conduits for creation itself. And in those solstice moments when blood and light danced together, the boundary between prayer and phenomenon dissolved, proof that sometimes the most powerful magic lies not in summoning gods but in painting their arrival into being. Beneath the blood-stained banners of the Andean highlands, victors carried trophies that didn't just symbolize conquest, they sang of it. The decapitated skull flutes were instruments crafted from a foe's most sacred bone, transforming death into a sound so haunting it echoed long after battle. But these weren't mere macabre tokens. Recent acoustic studies reveal a chilling design. The hollowed craniums produced tones uncannily resembling human screams when played during victory marches. Forensic musicians examining surviving flutes uncovered their grim engineering. Craftsmen would drill precise holes into the parietal bone, a location that, when air passed through, created resonant frequencies between 1,000 and 3,000 Hz, the same range as a shriek. Spanish chroniclers described the effect as unearthly, with entire plazas falling silent as the flute's wails sliced through the air. Some accounts even claim the instruments could mimic specific warriors' voices, a psychological weapon reinforcing that the defeated could never truly rest. Yet the ritual ran deeper than intimidation. The Inca believed the skull housed a person's money, their life force and memory. By shaping it into an instrument, they didn't just silence their enemy, they harnessed their essence. Modern anthropologists note an eerie pattern. Many flutes were buried with their conquerors, suggesting the voices of the vanquished were meant to serve even in the afterlife. What unsettles isn't just the craftsmanship but the ceremony. Warriors didn't merely play these flutes, they duetted with them. Paintings in a secluded Chow cave depict victors holding skull flutes to their lips while dancing in precise spirals, a choreography mirroring the spiraling path of souls ascending to the gods. The message was clear: in the Andes, even death could be reshaped into music, and in those moments as the bone flutes howled across the mountains, the living and the dead were bound together in a symphony of triumph and torment. Ritual 25, the last forbidden rite, the unwritten one. After centuries of excavation, translation, and forensic study, 24 of these ancient Andean rituals have been unearthed from the shadows of history. But whispers persist among modern Quechua elders and anthropologists alike that the most potent rite of all was never written down, never carved into stone, never entrusted to the invaders' parchments. The 25th, the unwritten one. Unlike other ceremonies, archaeologists have found no tools, no murals, no skeletal remains to hint at its nature. The only clues, fragmented oral traditions passed down in hushed tones, warning that this ritual was so sacred, so volatile, that knowledge of it could only survive in living memory, never fixed in ink or clay. Some believe it was a final act of rebellion by the Inca priesthood, a way to safeguard their most powerful secret even as their empire crumbled. Researchers have pieced together tantalizing fragments. A Spanish friar's diary from 1592 mentions a cryptic confession from a captured priest who spoke of a ceremony requiring no blade, no flame, only the unbroken thread of breath. In remote highland villages, elders still allude to something called the naming that must not be named, a ritual conducted in total silence where the spoken word itself became a kind of sacrifice. Theories range from the pragmatic to the chilling. Some anthropologists speculate it was a mass meditation, a collective act of will to summon divine intervention. Others suggest it might have been a ritual suicide pact among elites, a final act of defiance to deny the Spanish their spoils, the most haunting hypothesis. That the rite wasn't performed for the gods, but on them a desperate attempt to sever the divine connection entirely, leaving the conquerors stranded in a world suddenly devoid of magic. Yet for all the speculation, the truth remains just out of reach, buried not in the earth but in the stubborn silence of those who vowed to carry it to the grave. And so the question lingers, heavy as mountain stone. What desperate act was so forbidden, even history itself wasn't permitted to remember? Perhaps some doors are meant to stay closed. Or perhaps, just perhaps, they're waiting for the right moment to open. From blood-stained altars to whispered divination, the forbidden rituals of the ancient Andes reveal a spirituality as vast and rugged as the mountains themselves. These weren't mere superstitions, they were profound negotiations between humanity and the unseen, where every drop of blood, every hallucinogenic vision, every bone flute's wail carried the weight of a civilization's hopes and fears. What emerges is a tapestry of belief so intricate, it challenges our modern assumptions about life, death, and the sacred. Archaeologists and historians are still piecing together fragments of this lost world. New technologies, from DNA analysis of mummified remains to spectral imaging of buried artifacts, continue to rewrite what we thought we knew. Just last year, researchers in Peru uncovered a sealed cave containing ritual bundles untouched since the Spanish conquest, each one a potential key to understanding the whispers of the past. The story is far from over. Now we turn to you. Which of these rituals left you stunned? Was it the child sacrifices frozen in time on the peaks, or the shamans who sliced open skulls in the name of healing? The mirror portals that called forth spirits, or the black llamas offered to the void? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. And if you're hungry for more forbidden history, hit that subscribe button. Coming soon, Part 2, where we'll expose the colonial-era secrets Spain tried desperately to erase: lost rituals, hidden rebellions, and the untold stories of those who kept the old ways alive against impossible odds. Until then, remember, the past isn't dead. It's not even past. It's waiting just beneath the surface for those willing to listen.